Harold Benson for your vision. With Harold's 5 years ago, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Apollo lunar landing, the Apollo 11 lunar landing. And with all of Harold's significant efforts, the library was able to host a series of paneled presentations, which were well attended and enjoyed by all. Several of the people in this room were actually on those panels and presented, so I thank you for coming again 5 years later. With Harold's continual vision, he has formalized, he has been working on formalizing the impact that the NASA Friendswood resident employees have had on the Apollo program, as well as their families' impact on the Friendswood community during the 1960s. Through those efforts, the library now has a print collection that captures the Apollo program and some of the efforts before and after those endeavors. We also have now a permanent display, which Harold is going to discuss this evening and introduce to you what it is and a little bit of the background of that display. We invite you after the presentation to walk back to the Josina Day Baker conference room. It's all the way in the back left. That's where it is on display. You can see it up close. There will be light refreshments back there for you to enjoy and to spend some time, stay after and visit with one another. So thank you, Harold.
Thank you. You better wait to the end. You may change your mind about that. As Kim said, we've been working on about a year and a half trying to figure out a permanent display for the library that kind of shows the impact of the NASA program on the city of Friendswood. So what I'm going to show you is the charts that we've put together, and you can, as she said, you can go look at them after we get finished. And all of you know we landed on the moon, America landed on the moon in July the 20th, so we're 5 days away from the 55th anniversary of it. Okay, let's see if I can make this thing go. Okay, first thing is this poster, I call it, that I ran into actually in the Friendswood frame shop. And I was looking at it, and even though I worked on the program from the 60s to the 70s, I had never seen this chart. And so the owner, Luis Briones, hollered out, he says, "It's not for sale." And I said, "Well, where did you get it?" And he had bought the frame shop from the Brahodas, and they didn't know where it came from either, but they just found it. But then Luis knew all about it. The one he had was done in '67. This one was done in '69, so it's a little more current than the one he had. I found it on the internet, bought it, and we got it framed. But it is really a good description of the whole program. And what we're going to do is I'll kind of hit some highlights here, and then we've got it segmented out, and I'll discuss some of each one of them. But the key thing was, how were you going to get to the moon? And there were three concepts. There was one, you could just build a giant rocket and go straight there. You could do an Earth orbit rendezvous where you, at the time they were thinking maybe they didn't have big enough boosters, so we'd do multiple launches and assemble stuff in low Earth orbit and then go to the moon. And then this concept is called lunar orbit rendezvous. It is all done in one shot with a staged rocket that then gets you in orbit and then out of orbit on the way to the moon, and then get you to the moon, and I'll describe a little of this later. The politics on all this was interesting. I didn't know any of the players, but the guy that was promoting this concept couldn't get his boss to buy it, and he went over his head. And a lot of the people didn't like that, and they never forgot that. But at the end, I understand that after we landed on the moon, von Braun, who built the rocket, went over to him and thanked him for this concept, because we probably would have never made it in the time frame that we did. So let's see if we can take a look at a little bit more of that. Okay. The name of the game with rockets is you do things in stages. You have a rocket, you have it full of fuel, you get rid of all that fuel on launch, and then drop that weight off so you can get rid of that weight as drag, and through the second rocket, that'd be another stage. So there was a 3-stage rocket, and it would go get us into orbit and on the way to the moon. And this particular picture also depicts a little bit about, and you're going, for the people in the back, this is supposed to exist, and you can get right up to it and look at it. But it explains the whole program, on how we got there and how we came back. Okay, and this just explains how you get out of lunar orbit to the surface of the moon and then back out. And basically what you had was what they call the lunar module that is pictured here, but actually what it is, it was all together here, pulled out of the rocket and went on to the moon, then separated from the command module, landed, and then did your work on the surface, and then the landing half of it was the launch pad for the ascent part, with the 2 men back in orbit, and then docked to the command module and came home. Okay, another element of the program was you wanted to have contact with the mission the entire time. So there was a whole network built around the world that it tried to keep up. There were some gaps in the communication, but the purpose was to make sure that everything was going all right and the vehicle was data and they could talk to the pilots, the commanders, and so that became a whole network, which then I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in detail, but essentially the control center, which was here, was always in contact 24 hours a day during the whole mission. Okay, now these are the 2 main elements. And by the way, the other thing that's nice about this chart, if you go to Space Center Houston, it's the best space museum that exists, in my opinion. But you can't tell how this whole thing worked. And, you'd see a command module here and a spacesuit here and all, but and they have a whole Saturn V out there, but you don't get the idea of who's doing what. So the bottom line is the whole stack looks like this. It was 3 stages of rockets, and then this is sitting on top, and essentially this was the payload for the mission, and the rocket's responsibility was done at Marshall Space Flight Center, and the Manned Spacecraft Center / Johnson Spacecraft Center was responsible for the payload. So in other words, the way to look at it is if the man touched it, we did it here. If they was using the propulsion system somewhere else, it was done somewhere else. Okay, now this shows the elements that were the responsibility of the Manned Spacecraft Center. And you had your command module that the 3 men sat in on the launch pad. and went all the way to the moon in it. It had a service module attached to it that was water and power, batteries, and propulsion, so that you get going to the moon and you could get into orbit around the moon and then get back out of orbit to come back home. The lunar module was in two elements that I already told you. That the landing part served as the launch pad for the ascent part when it went go back up to the command module. And then we had the suit development that on the Gemini program you use vehicle environmental services, and then when you were on the lunar surface you had what's called a life support system that provided support to the astronauts. Let's see if I got everything covered here. Yeah.
Mike, yeah.
Okay. This chart, now we've got charts that we've made. And the first thing that we found, or I found, that was the Manned Spacecraft Center phone book came out in August of 1969, 1 month after we landed on the moon. So it was a good time slot of who was working there and all. And what was unique about the phone book, it had the employee, what organization he was in, where he lived, and his home phone number as well as his office number. So I was able to then go through that phone book and select where these people were working. But first off, we'll talk about what Kraft said in his book. I was part of the crowd that then part of the leadership that opened space travel to human beings. We threw a narrow flash of light across the nation's history. And then there was 341 residents of NASA employees in Friendswood, and we were part of that crowd. And this is not necessarily the demographics of the whole organization, but this is just who was living in the city of Friendswood. And so there was 98 engineering support, 73 flight ops, thank you, 42 flight crew support, administration, Apollo program office, science and application, reliability and quality, and 22 other organizations. These two organizations, the 98 and 73, consisted of engineers, mathematicians, physics majors, and I think that was it. I was thinking there was one more. But anyway, they were all, I'll call technical people. What Kraft did was, in the flight operations side of the game, he made sure all of those people were young so that he could mold them to his way of wanting to do business. Maybe okay, yeah, we got to get it. Okay, then you ask yourself, well, where did these people come from? Well, there's a whole lot of interesting things that happened during this period. First off, give you some back up a little bit. Before there was a NASA, there was an NACA, National Aeronautics Administration, and it was actually started after World War I, when they realized that the airplanes that we used in World War I were better than the ones we had in America. And so America decided they wanted to do aeronautical research. And the lead center for that was a place called Langley Research Center, or National Aeronautical Space Studies or something, aircraft studies. But that's not the Langley that's CIA. The Langley CIA is across the Potomac from D.C. Langley Research Center was in Hampton, Virginia. So the majority of the initial majority of the technical people in engineering and flight ops were Langley Research Center people, the large percentage of them. They had been doing, well, Kraft, as an example, Kraft went to work in 1947, the year that we broke the sound barrier. And he was in operations at that time, and they was just getting used to having communications with the test pilots and what was going on. And as technology improved, that got better and better and better. So Kraft was the director of all of that, and he knew what he wanted to do from a worldwide standpoint, and then being in contact with the pilot all the way, as well as his medical condition and so forth. So there was a large percentage of Langley people that moved into Friendswood. At the same time, there was a series of events. The Canadians were building an airplane called the Arrow, and the Prime Minister killed the program overnight. And that was about 59 or 60. Now back on Langley, what Langley's product was reports. They would run tests in a wind tunnel or what have you, and then they would write a report about it. Well, it turned out that the Canadians, which was a company named Avro, had developed a relationship with Langley people, and to the point that the Canadians challenged the conclusion of one of NACA's reports, and they became friends, and Canadians were actually right. So they remember these people. Okay, now when the Arrow program was canceled, they gathered up 300 resumes that were working there and sent them to Langley. And Langley cherry-picked them and picked about 40 of them. So we had Canadians. The B-58 program in General Dynamics Fort Worth had a lot of problems technically, but then they also, what it was designed, the mission it was designed for was superseded with some other process or mission. And so they laid off a bunch of these people right when we were moving to Houston, which was in January, March of '62. So we hired a bunch of those people. Another one was, there was a program called the 880 done by Convair in San Diego, and it was a competition jet plane for the Boeing 707, which was the first commercial jet. That program got in trouble, and they were laying off people, and a lot of those came here. Let me think just a second here. Oh, if you want to see an 880, which is what the airplane is, it's in Memphis because Elvis bought one. And there's people in this room who can talk more about flight crew support than I can, but the point is that the crew had to have a lot of training and testing and so forth, and that organization did a lot of that, the simulators and things of that nature. The administration, there's an interesting story there. There was, Langley Research Center had an apprentice program, and some of those apprentices were better engineers than we were. And they were put in administration area, but there was quite a few of those technicians that were really better than the engineers, and they also lived here in Friendswood. And then you had the program office, which none of this hardware was built here. The name of the game was we were the government. We were kind of the check and balance of what was being built. And so nothing in Houston was manufactured. But there was on occasion some small stuff that we would build in our shops. It might be last minute stuff that you might fly on a mission or what have you. But those guys in the test field and all were excellent, and some of them actually became division chiefs. Okay, so we got the GD Fort Worth, Convair, San Diego, Canadians, Langley, and then we did hire Texans and Oklahomans and everything else. The point is, all these people were really it wasn't just one area that they grew up in. We had almost a United Nations type of organization that were from everywhere. Okay, let's see what the next chart says. Okay, now we've also bought and given to the library all the books of any author that lived in Friendswood. And I'll tell you, so they were, George Lowe was the Apollo program manager after the fire. And his book is called The Ultimate Engineer. It really ought to be The Ultimate Engineer and Manager, in my opinion. But he was an Austrian that got out of Austria in '39 running from the Nazis. And his family settled in New England. And he went to Rensselaer, which is in Troy, New York. But if you read his book, he was a true planner. And one of the probably the most pressure for the guys in flight ops was he decided the program in '68 was running behind. The lunar module wasn't ready, and he decided in August we could fly the mission we were planning with the lunar module, without the lunar module, and do a dress rehearsal of everything from going there, getting an orbit to the moon, and coming back with the 3 astronauts in the command module, never going down to the surface. And he decided that in August, and they flew it in December. And that's the one that they read from the scripture and the famous photograph of the Earth rising from the moon. Craft was from Poquoson, Virginia, which is on the Chesapeake Bay near Hampton, Virginia. And in his book he says Poquoson doesn't exist anymore, but it was taken over by Hampton. But I did banking business in Poquoson at one time. He went to VPI. As I said, he went to work in '47. The kind of things he did, if you read that book, will just blow your mind. That he, first off, we had to get some rockets, and there was, I'm going to back up a minute. I left out one thing about the rockets. There was, after World War II, there was a thing called Operation Paperclip. And that's where we've got rockets where a lot of the high technology Germans, and then we brought them to America. And von Braun, which you probably have heard the name, came with his whole crew that they were shooting V-2 rockets and bombing London with. So it turns out that when they started building the Saturn, he was a German. Kurt Debus was at the Cape. He was a German. And the manufacturing head was a German. So Kraft didn't have to deal with them, but we bought 2 Air Force rockets, an Atlas and a Titan. And he bought one that would be on the line to be built, but then he wanted to add instrumentation to the Air Force rockets, and so that he could get some sense of what was going on and it might blow up, so that they could use the escape rocket and get away from it. The one thing I didn't point out was there's a little rocket on the top of that whole stack that can pull the command module away if the rocket is blowing up. So he had that to deal with. He was building the flight ops type thing. He was getting the communications worldwide. In the mission that they decided to do from August to December was the Vietnam War was going on, and the Navy, which we used to recover all the landings, they landed in the water and recovered them, was trying to give a break to some of the Navy during the war. Kraft went and briefed Admiral McCain, whose son was in the Hanoi Hilton, and he briefed him on what he needed and what he wanted to do, where he wanted ships, and they claimed that the Admiral said, "That's the best presentation I've ever heard. Give this man anything he needs." So they did. Okay, that's kind of what Kraft was all about. Okay, and then Lunny was a resident here, and he was essentially running, he didn't run, but he was a big leader in the flight control area, and he managed the consoles. So that book describes more of the real actual operation of what the control center was all about. Now, Moonshot was by Slayton, and there's 2 of them there. One was written by Shepard and Slayton, and the other one was he did it all by himself. He lived here. Apparently, he convinced Kraft to move to Friendswood because of the trees, and now we learn what good the trees do us now. But he was from Wisconsin. He was a farm boy from Wisconsin, and his daddy wouldn't even let him drive a car, and he was a test pilot. And there's more to that. I mean, that's just, most of these books, they start off with the family and how they grew up and that kind of stuff, because they sort of a memoir, but then it gets into what they really did. And we left Jerry out because you didn't write this between 60 and 70. I'm sorry, Jerry. And then one by Larry Bell, which is more of an engineering itself. The cost element for engineering is called DDT&E, Design, Development, Test, and Evaluation. And you can wind up as an engineer just doing development and not even doing the rest of it. But anyway, Larry was responsible for the development of the spacesuit. And he had a boss. He told this story at what Kim talked about in the other session, that if you developed some hardware, you were going to test it. So they put Larry in a suit and put him in a vacuum chamber and tested the first system they were going to fly on Gemini. So that's a good book if you're into engineering type functions. So you got management, operations, control centers, and test pilots. All good books to read. Okay. Next chart. Okay. This chart was invented by this gentleman here on my left, where he and I were talking about it. I was trying to find a map of Friendswood and could not find one. We had several different editions, but we finally found one in '72. And so this is what the map of Friendswood looked like in '72. And remember that across the Clear Creek was not part of Friendswood at that time. And so then I took the phone book again and said how many people were in each of these subdivisions. I think there's 13 there. But just to give you an idea, Imperial Estates had 42 and 31 in Imperial Gardens and 4 in Empire Chateau. All that land belonged to ancestors of the Browns, and they were some of the first subdivisions that went in. And as an example, there was 5, okay, let's start with Canadian. There were 4 Canadians in Friendswood, and 3 of them lived, no, 2 of them lived in Imperial Estates, 1 of them lived in Imperial Gardens, and 1 lived in Imperial Chateau. The University of South Carolina class, that was mine, there was 5 of us here. 2 of us were in Imperial Gardens, 2 of us were in Imperial Estates, and 1 in Analia Whitehall, which is the largest number. Sun Meadow and Quaker's Landing was just starting, so there's very few people in those 2 subdivisions by the time we landed on the moon. So you can blame Denny Hope for that chart. Okay, then the last chart is a timeline. And what this is what was happening in the space program, which is in white, from 60 to 70. And then what various things were going on in town, like civic changes, schools, I can't even remember what they put in there, residential developments, and community growth. So I'll just take a couple of them to talk about. First Mercury flight was in '61. And so if you wanted to come across here, there's 260 students in the high school. It's first city elections, and 518 was hard surface 2-lane road. The Episcopal Church came in 1960, Hope Lutheran, United Methodist was in like 63 time frame, and Church of Christ, and then the Mary Queen. But you can look at this, see what's going on in the space program, and then come across and see what's happening in Friendswood. And I know nobody in the back can see any of this, but you're going to have an opportunity to go look at these and study them. But to give you I put in a couple of other items. There was a Ranger probe and a survey. Those 2, there was another part of NASA that's also interesting. NASA gives the money to Caltech, and Caltech runs the whole management, and it's called Jet Propulsion Laboratories, because it really started with J-O bottles on short takeoff airplanes. But the Ranger, so this gives you some feel of what we knew and what we didn't know. The Ranger was nothing but a camera that flew into the moon and took pictures going in. So the first close-up pictures we had was in '64. We didn't even settle on the lunar orbit rendezvous as a concept until '62. And so from '62, 7.5 years later, America was on the moon. But we got some pictures of it close up, and we landed an unmanned vehicle in '66. But before then, we had little knowledge of what surface was. But you can just see the gravitation, and then this goes on. It's not shown here. But the Gemini flight, I guess it's not shown there. But Gemini is when the program changed from catching up with the Russians to beating the Russians. The Russians started first, and there's a movie that talks about all the crashes we were having on our rockets, and the Russians were shooting them up like firecrackers. And they said, "Why is that happening?" And the movie guy says, "Well, their Germans must be better than our Germans." But we passed them up when we started the Gemini program. Okay, there were 3 programs. There was the Mercury program, the Gemini program, and then the Apollo program. But all of them were steps to doing that whole mission, the lunar orbit rendezvous. The Gemini proved that we could go extra vehicle activity, go outside the vehicle in space, in a spacesuit. But the real key, it taught us that we could actually fly the vehicles, so that we could maneuver in space, and the Russians wasn't doing any of that by the time we started doing that. So we knew we had them by that time. I think that's it. We can go study these charts, and they will be in the library hopefully forever, and it explains what kind of happened in Friendswood. The community spirit was unreal. We had pothole Saturdays that we'd get a truck of asphalt and ride around town. Volunteers would shovel asphalt in the potholes. Save you some money. And we built the city hall. I think I told you that with just the human efforts and people buying the materials. And that was the first city hall. So there's a lot of interesting things on that timeline to kind of correlate between. But that's what's in the other room. I want to thank, we also have done a little archiving. The Clear Lake University of Houston Clear Lake has got a tremendous archive that they've been getting stuff from retired people, and they're sticking it in there. We've got a little bit smaller one, and it's trying to be more focused toward Friendswood than it was just the space program. So there's things in there that we've added. There's some reports that just a sample of what a technical report looked like from Langley. What the little 2-page brochure, how to give a technical talk and how to write a technical paper that was better than any technical course I took in college to write reports. And there's a master's thesis there, and there's a scientific magazine presentation of everything about Surveyor, just to give people not just something that's archives. Apparently, I'm going to speak on something I do not know, But people just take it and put it in there, and then somebody wants to research it, then they have to go find it and figure it. But this stuff there, if you can dig it out, we've at least organized what we got if you wanted to see any of the stuff. And then it's not that much, but it's some things that you could use if you were in college and wanted to write a report or what have you. Okay, that's my part of the show, but we can go to the other room and have something to drink here or something.
All right. Well, let's give Harold a round of applause.